Well, we've all heard the phrase post-traumatic stress. Israelis demonstrate what's called post-traumatic growth. This tiny nation has faced war and adversity every day of its existence. Through every struggle, they emerge stronger. And it's because of the genius of Israel.
What happened on October 7th, I think nobody could even in his wildest dream think that this could happen to us. Never.
They ask people, how satisfied are you with your life?
Israel doesn't have a loneliness crisis.
But we're all part of one big tribe.
And Israelis are just more connected.
So the question's why? What is Israel doing? The country's culture is undergirded by this sense that Israelis are looking out for one another.
The country needs you. It's time to serve, and that's really what it's about.
Well, Erin Zimmerman is the writer and director of The Genius of Israel, and she's with us in studio after having spent the past few weeks and rocket fire and air raid sirens in northern Israel. So we're very glad to see you back here in the United States.
No one's happier than I am, Terry.
Timing is everything, right?
Yes.
You know, as I've watched all of this unfold in the news, October 7th was so jarring, as was 9/11 for the United States. But a unity comes out of those moments, a loyalty comes out of those moments. Sometimes over time that fades, but it doesn't seem to be so with Israel. It's like these moments seem to bring the country together. People stand together. You celebrate and commemorate issues that have happened years ago, decades ago, and you still stand strong. What's the difference, do you think?
I'll tell you, the Jewish people are the most tribal people that I have ever seen. And while there is division, and while we have seen it in these protests, which continue every week in Tel Aviv, the division is more against the government itself. There are people, it's not unlike America, people on both sides of the spectrum, and it's a very sharp division. However, the Israeli people among themselves are very unified. I don't know personally, I know a lot of people. I personally don't know one that is a personal acquaintance of a hostage, and yet they care about these hostages as if they were their own family. They are actively sad and grieving over these hostages. They have this inner need to go help people, and I saw that firsthand. I was there on October 7th, and I saw immediately my film crew. I told my costume designer, she was my inspiration for this project because she's also a very good cook, and she immediately, the day after, October 8th, she's gathering all the women in her apartment building and they're cooking, and they don't even know who they're cooking for yet. They're just cooking mass meals for soldiers, for displaced families, and this is, and it's not just unique to her, this is all over the country, and I thought when I saw it, somebody has to document this. And of course, you know, when you say that, God's up there going, it's you.
What are you doing?
You have to document
for the next few years, right?
So.
You know, I want you to talk a little bit about the sense of, you're talking about this bond amongst people, but some of that, it seems to me, comes out of how Israel was reestablished as people came back. My very first trip to Israel was like in the early 70s, stayed on a kibbutz, you know, gunfire in the background, but kibbutz living generates what you're talking about, doesn't it?
Yes, and that was by necessity, because when these early settlers started coming in the late 19th century, there were so many raiders, Bedouin raiders, there was so much danger about them. They couldn't just say, I'm going to go buy my own house. They had to live communally. They had to put what they call the stockade and tower settlements, you know, the wall around it and the tower for the lookout. And so by nature, it is a very communal society. But I also think Judaism is like this. And I asked the author of this book, one of them is a Jewish person from New York, not from Israel. And I said, do you feel this same sense of community among your Jewish friends in New York? And he said, we do. It's not the whole society, but we feel it among ourselves. They are the only people on earth who have survived 2,000 years of exile. And no matter where they come from, they all have that in common, and that's what they'll tell you. Our instinct is for survival, and to survive, we have to be together, and we have to be unified, and it's very biblical.
Even when it costs, because, you know, I think of, I mean, my generation was young when Vietnam happened, and people who thought they might be enlisted were leaving for Canada and other points. But the way the military works in Ukraine, there's a sense of this is my land, these are my people, this is my responsibility. Everybody serves.
Everybody serves, and even the people who don't have to. The reservists that they were calling up who have aged out of their normal military service showed up at a rate of 140 to 150%. People were saying, look, I know I'm older, but let me do something. Even Orthodox Jews, many of whom don't normally serve, were showing up and saying, we want to serve, we want to do something. And girls, this is the one that really got me, because as a woman, if I knew I was going in the Army at 18, I'd probably have a heart attack. I just wouldn't want to. These girls are not only going into the Army, they are fighting each other for spaces in combat units. They are really proud to do it, and they're racing toward it, and it's just amazing to watch.
Talk a little bit about the concept of tikkun olam. What is that? Because it really is totally behind much of what you're talking about.
I love this. That's a Hebrew phrase meaning to repair the world, because we all know everything's wrong with the world.
Yeah,
and for some reason, Jewish people, among all the people in the world, feel the responsibility to fix the world in as much as they can. And so they do it. And we started this film with a quote that says, you know, the Jewish people are responsible for one another, which is very heavy. It means that anytime you see a need among the Jewish people, you go meet it.
Your
and
need
that's
is my need.
Yes, and that's what this is about. But we wanted to end the film on this tikkun olam, because it might sound like, oh, well, great, the Jews are only helping themselves, wonderful. But then we show what they're doing for the rest of the world. And many times for Arab countries with whom they're technically at war, they're still helping their enemies. Even Ismail Haniyeh, who was just recently departed, the head of Hamas, he's had maybe 5 relatives, I think, treated in Israeli hospitals.
Wow.
So,
Which are open.
Which are
to
open,
people
yes.
needing to be treated.
They flew him in secretly, flew them in, didn't say anything about it, treated them quietly, and sent them back. Yeah.
You're working on the final installments of the Oracles of God. Talk about that. What's the project about, and what can we expect?
Okay, well, this is part of a 5-part series on the creation of the Bible. We released the first one last year, the Old Testament. Now we're working in the New Testament, and this has been the most amazing thing to see, because we're getting into Jesus and the apostles and Paul and the writers and the people who created and canonized the Bible, and were part of that process. Yes. But I have all these sweet young Israeli actors, and they're playing Jesus, and they're playing the apostles, and they are saying the words of the Sermon on the Mount, reenacting the Last Supper, the Lord's Prayer, the crucifixion, which will be coming up. And they are so full of questions about their characters. I was sitting in rehearsal space with them a few days ago, and they're saying, well, what about this? What about this? Why is this apostle doing this? And I was telling them Bible stories. And they said to me, wow, they looked at each other and they said, wow, why haven't we heard these stories in school? And I said, well, you wouldn't have their Christian stories.
Yes.
So it was a real joy, and they're so interested, and they get invested in these characters. And I'm just saying, okay, maybe part of the purpose of this film is not even for the film itself, but it's to be there telling them these stories and just opening them a little bit at a time, you know, so maybe they find the Messiah someday.
God's always doing more than one thing.
Yes. Oh, for
More
sure.
than the very
He's doing
obvious.
10 things.
Yes, absolutely. Well, listen, friends, I want to tell you The Genius of Israel is now available from CBN Films. For your gift of any dollar amount, you can receive a DVD copy of The Genius of Israel and receive instant 4K streaming. All you have to do is call 1-800-700-7000 or go to geniusofisraelfilm.com. And then you can also text, if you prefer, GENIUS to 80888. Erin, thank you for all that you do. You bring everything that is important to us as believers alive, and it's a blessing.
Oh, thank you for all your prayers and support. We feel it.
Absolutely. Stay here till you need to come back.
I'm trying. You and my mother are both teaming up.
I'm with your mother. Okay.